Hi all, now we are going to learn about the human respiratory system. Let's start with the diagram. So as you can see here, this is the human respiratory system. Okay, so it includes our nose, our tracheas, bronchi, and the lungs, everything. So let's check one by one. So it starts from the nasal cavity. So what is the duty of nasal cavity? When we inhale the air, right, it passes through the nostrils into the nasal cavity. And in the nasal cavity, there is a lot of filters that filter the dust, microbes, and it will moisten the air. Okay. So you can see a lot of small hairs and all in your nose, right? That is what we are mentioning. And from the nasal cavity, the air passes through the pharynx. So as you can see here, so the air will enter through your nose, the nasal cavity, then through this, it will move to the pharynx, right? So the pharynx, larynx, all this will be there. And then it will be entering into the trachea. Got it? Then what happens? The trachea divided into two bronchi. Okay. Entering each lung. So you can see here the trachea, the main branch of trachea is dividing into two, right? Which enter into the two lungs. Then inside the lungs, okay, bronchi further divided into small tubes called bronchioles. Okay, so here you can see that the bronchi are again divided into small portions, right? See, so these are called bronchioles. Okay, so we started from the nostrils, then to nasal cavity, then pharynx, larynx, trachea, and then into bronchi, and then bronchioles, right? So these bronchioles end in a tiny air sac called alveoli. So at the end of each bronchioles, okay, so we have a tiny air sac like this. Okay. So that is what we call as alveoli. This is the alveoli. Okay. So you can see the structure of alveoli. It's a very thin layered structure. Okay. It will expand and contract during the gases exchange. So we are coming to that. So this is an introduction how the air we inhale will reach to the lungs. Is it clear with everyone? Okay. So this is what we have discussed so far. Okay. So when we inhale the air, it passes through the nostrils, then into the nasal cavity. It will filter dust and microbes and moistens the air. And from the nasal cavity, air passes through the pharynx, then to larynx, and then to trachea. Right? And the trachea will divide into two bronchi and entering into the both lungs. See? And then the lungs, inside the lungs, bronchi further divided into smaller tubes called bronchioles. And these bronchioles end in a tiny air sac called the alveoli. So these are the structure. Okay. Now we have to learn about the gas exchange. So what is happening inside the alveoli? So as I mentioned, alveoli have a thin wall and are surrounded by blood capillaries. So the alveoli, right? So you can see a lot of blood capillaries. Okay, so see the red and blue color here, these are blood vessels. Okay, the blood capillaries. So alveoli are surrounded by a lot of capillary network. Okay, and oxygen from the inhaled air diffuses into the blood and carbon dioxide from the blood diffuses into the alveoli and it is exhaled. Okay. So what is happening here? So in the inhaled air, there will be oxygen, right? So from the alveoli, this oxygen will be getting dissolved into the blood. Okay, the blood. And there will be CO2 in the blood, right? And where does this CO2 comes from? And we already learned that the respiration, right? So we learned about the respiration. And in the respiration, we mentioned that as a part of the process, the respiration process, the glucose will be transformed into pyruvate. And then in aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration, as a byproduct, CO2 will be released. That CO2 will also get dissolved in the blood, right? So that CO2 will be exchanged here. Okay, so the CO2 rich blood will become O2 rich blood once it is passed through the lungs. Okay. So that we will learn more detail in the double circulation. Okay. So that is what happening here. The gases exchange. Okay. So alveoli have thin walls and are surrounded by blood capillaries. That is the first point you should keep in mind. And then oxygen from the inhaled air diffuses into the blood, right? Oxygen diffuses into the blood. And what about CO2, carbon dioxide? That will be diffuses into the alveoli and it is exhaled. Okay, that is why when we are exhaling the air, it has more CO2 concentration. Okay. And what is the role of lungs here? Basically, where do the lungs is situated? In the cavity area, right? So the lungs are present in the chest cavity. Okay. And they are very soft, spongy, and very rich in blood vessels. And what is their main function? Their function is exchange of gases, O2 and CO2. Okay. These are the roles of lungs. And now let's take a look into the breathing mechanism. Okay. So, you know the diaphragm, right? When you place your hand on your abdomen, you can feel the diaphragm. Okay. So, while you're breathing, there will be a movement of the diaphragm and a rib cage, right? We can feel it when we are taking a deep inhale and a deep exhale, you can feel the movement. So, while you're inhaling it, the diaphragm will contract and moves downward. Okay. And what about the ribs? They will move upward and outward. Okay. And the chest cavity will expand, air enters to the lungs. So when you inhale, basically what is happening? Your lungs will be expanding, right? As a result, ribs will move upward and outward. Diaphragm will contract and move downward. Okay. These are the changes. And what if you are exhaling? The diaphragm will relax and moves upward. Okay. And what about ribs? They will move downward and inward. Also, the chest cavity reduces and air pushed up. Okay, air will be pushed up. So this is what we call as the breathing mechanism. Okay, so this is what we call as the breathing mechanism. Clear? So this is what we have to learn about the breathing. Okay, so human respiratory system. So in while breathing, the diaphragm and rib cage will move, and the diaphragm contracts and move downward while inhaling. Rib move will upward and outward, and the chest cavity will expand. And in the exhalation part, it will be just opposite. Diaphragm will be relaxed and moves upward. Ribs movement will be downward and inward. Chest cavity will be reduced and air is pushed down. Okay. So we can revise it with the help of a flow chart, right? That will be more easy. So I'll share you one flow chart. So let's take a look into that as well. Okay, just check this flow chart. Everything is there. Okay. So as you can see here, the human respiratory system, right? So we start from the nostrils, then the air will move to the nasal cavity, then to pharynx, then to larynx, then it will enter into the trachea. And the trachea will be divided, right? It will to enter the both lungs, it will be divided, right? You can see that here also, and that is called as bronchioles. And these bronchioles will further divide inside the lungs, right? And small branches will be there that are called bronchioles. And in the end of each bronchioles, you can also spot it here. We have the small sacs, which are called alveoli. Okay. So we have the alveoli. And the alveoli are the tiny air sac where gas pushages occurs, right? So there will be some pushage. And what is happening while you are inhaling it, diaphragm contracts and move up downward, ribs move upward and outward, and chest cavity will expand. Air enters the lungs. So this is what occurs. And once the gas exchange is done, that is when the CO2 is enter into the alveoli and the oxygen will be get enter into the bloodstream, the air will go in the backwards, right? From alveoli to bronchioles, bronchiole to bronchi, then to trachea, then to larynx, then to pharynx, then to nasal cavity, and through nostril, it will go out. Okay. So what is the gases exchange occurring at alveoli? O2 diffuses into the blood capillaries and CO2 diffuses into the alveoli to be exhaled. So this is what we call as human respiratory system.